I'm deep in assembly mode, man. I'm just putting stuff away and getting ready to roll. I got some stuff going on this week and this weekend, and I'm just strapped. And I wanted to make a video today about. I was thinking, man, I'm gonna make a video about Hulk Hogan today. So I put on the sleeveless Mustang Mania t-shirt and everything. But then I started looking through, what today in history type stuff, and I see that it's Edgar Degas' birthday, right? And so I can't just let that go, because I just talked about Rembrandt, and I like Degas a lot. I think he's a really good artist, even though I don't really identify with Degas quite so much personally. Degas was kind of on the edge between an art movement called realism and impressionism, and he showed a lot with the impressionist artists, but he was not an impressionist artist. A lot of people say, oh, he was an impressionist because he showed with them, but his style was not impressionist, because the impressionists had these rules, like they had a set guideline, and he was buddies with all these guys, and he ran with all these guys, and he drank with all these guys, and even to some degree made art with these guys, but the way that he made art was not in the vein of impressionism, and so it would not be fair to call him an impressionist. But was born in Paris, the son of a very wealthy banker, and he lived his life as such. He never really had to have a job because he never really had to work, and so he would spend his life and his time doing what wealthy people did. He was getting an education, but beyond that, he was also working on art and improving his skills on art when other people had to get a job to survive and that sort of thing. He was able to live a very soft life and simply draw what he wanted to do. He would go to the racetrack and look at the horses, and he would draw them, and he'd go to the ballet, and he'd go backstage and mingle with the people and go to the rehearsals and the practices and sketch the dancers. And compared to most people of his time, he had a pretty soft life. He was friends with Manet. Manet was more of a realist, and so Manet was a good friend. Mary Cassatt and her family would move from the United States to Paris, and he became a bit of an instructor friend type with her, and he was a good friend with James Whistler, who was also an American that was working in France at the time. He began to be very good friends with Monet. And Monet was kind of the guru of Impressionism, and he was also pretty good friends with Camilla Pissarro, who was also kind of like the Impressionist badass, if you will. And so they all kind of ran together, and he worked with them quite a bit. He would come to the United States. He spent some time in New Orleans, Louisiana, and he was working down there. And then upon his return to France, he was showing a lot with the Impressionist artists. And after that point, and he was he had his niche. He was showing the artwork of the upper crust Parisian, as opposed to Monet, who was showing this perspective of basically flowers and biological science. You had Camilla Pissarro, who was showing landscapes. You had you can go down the list of impressionists. Pissarro was doing what he was doing, and so on and so forth. Mary Cassatt was doing mothers and daughters. They all kind of had their little their little niche in society that they were representing or showing or portraying, because that was what they were interested in, and he certainly had his as well. You know, he had some pretty big pieces. You know, the Star, and there was another piece, a woman with a glove, or singer with a glove, or something like that. Anyway, he had some pretty big pieces that were respected and appreciated with pretty big success. But as was the case with a lot of these artists of this time period, you know, they're painting in oil, and there's a lot of vapors and fumes that go along with the thinners and the oils and all of that sort of thing. And so as those would evaporate, they would get into their eyes and dry their eyes out. And this drying of the eyes would cause cataracts, because a cataract is basically like a callus, and from your eyes not having enough moisture. And so it's this constant rubbing of opening and closing his eyes, and again, all of the liquid in his eyes was gone, and so it was pretty, you know, and so again, he developed this cataract, which caused him not to be able to see, which basically caused him caused him basic blindness. And at that time, cataract surgery was really, really risky. Monet actually had cataract surgery, and basically what they would do, and it's pretty horrible. So what they would do is they would take the eyelid, right, and then they would have to get rid of the callus. So what they would do is they'd have to rough it up first. So they had this thing. It was kind of like a paintbrush with only a few strands, but the pieces that came out were metal. So it had this like wire brush, and so this wire brush would scrape it all up, and then they would take a knife, and then they would slice it, and that would cut off that excess debris that they had roughed up and smooth it out. And sometimes it caused permanent blindness. I mean, it was a really risky surgery, and it took a lot of convincing for Monet to go through with it. And I mean, and his paintings literally change. I mean, they go from being kind of drab and dark to all of a sudden he brings back all of the color, and it's because of that. But at any rate, Degas he's completely unconvinced, because there's people who've gone blind from this thing. He's like, I'm not doing that. I am not doing it. And so he resorts to working in sculpture, and he makes a little ballerina aged 14, I believe is the name of the sculpture. This little sculpture of a girl. It's the only one. There's one in Paris that I've seen, and there's one in Washington, D.C. at the National Museum there through the Smithsonian that I've also seen, and there may be a couple of other copies floating around. But at any rate, so he makes these statues, and we come to find out after he died that he made a lot of tiny little figurine type things, and they were all cast and created into a series after he had died. And again, I saw there's one in Washington, D.C., and there's also one that I've seen at in Paris at the Musée d'Orsay. But, you know, again, at the end of his life, having to resort to going from something two-dimensional, like painting, to something three-dimensional, like sculpture, it was a change. I mean, he was awfully a versatile artist, and he made it work, but he, kind of like Beethoven, you know, he had this kind of hang-up about it, and he was ashamed of it, and he didn't go out into public. He became a hermit, and very sensitive about the fact that the one sense that he was supposed to have, that was supposed to be better than everybody else, was gone, and kind of a sad thing. I mean, and again, he instead of telling people about it or talking about it, he locked himself away and was ashamed of it. At the end of his life, he was a part of the last Impressionist show in 1886, and you know, he was making his last paintings sometime later. In 1908, he made his last painting, and again, he was just kind of depressed, you know. But at the end, what did he have to show for his life? You know, 2,000 plus oil paintings and drawings, as well as 150 sculptural pieces. And boy, you know, you got his work can sell for in the teens of millions of dollars a piece. And again, I don't want to put a price value on his work, you know. You know, if you got $15 million, go out and buy your Degas. But I've always been of the opinion that great pieces of art, regardless of who makes it, they should be on display and they should be available for the public, you know. But I guess that's another issue. But you know, what a interesting guy, and you know, again, it's been a while since he was alive. You know, he was July 19th, 1834. It was a long time ago, you know, and so you know, just like with Rembrandt, you know, hopefully we can reflect a little bit. I didn't want to do a big Art 101 thing with it, but at least not today. I got so much stuff to do. I got tearing down boxes and putting up curtains, and I just got too much stuff to do. I don't have time to do that today. So anyway, I just wanted to throw that out there for the masses, and hopefully I've got a lot of other work here I got to do. I'm doing some stuff for my art appreciation class, and I'm up to my eyeballs in the classics. You know, looking at Polykleitos, and right now I'm in the Greeks, looking to jump into Rome here soon. Then we'll slip down into the medieval stuff, a little Gothic art maybe, and Gothic cathedrals, and then we'll be rolling right into the Renaissance. Wow, man, I love the Renaissance. There aren't a lot of, oh gosh, I wish there were more art nerds out there on YouTube, and man, there used to be a bunch of them, but they've all slipped away. Anyway, I got stuff to do, so I'm out. Have a good day.